Hi everyone, Lorne Gaetz here from Sangoma Technologies. Welcome to my talk about the Dynamic Routes module in FreePBX. In today's talk, I will give a quick overview of the features that are available in Dynamic Routes. I will give some real practical examples of actual usage, somewhat simplified use cases, and I'll give some hints of what's possible with a little more sophisticated configuration. I am currently employed as the Open Source Community Director with Sangoma, and I'm also the Project Manager for the open source projects, Asterisk FreePBX. Without further ado, let's move on to a brief history of the Dynamic Routes module. The Dynamic Routes module was written by John Fawcett back in about 2009. John is an IT professional working in the telecom sector. And in 2009, he had a need to be able to influence call routing based on a SQL database lookup. At the time, he took the open source IVR module and the code from the caller ID lookup module and combined the two into what ultimately became the Dyn routes that we see today. So it allowed the caller to provide DTM input in the way that the IVR does. It took that input, combined it with an SQL query in order to get a return destination and then branch the call flow based on that. Over the years, from feature requests on GitHub and from the community, as well as code contributions from others, the module has grown quite a bit as far as features go from that first incarnation. For many years, the module existed on GitHub as an unsigned third-party module. Anyone who is interested in installing it could get it directly from there, install it on the PBX, and use it as they always have. There's also some wiki pages on John's webpage for using the module. In 2020, right around now, I think a year ago yesterday from this time that I'm recording this, the module was formally contributed to the FreePBX project. We are hosting it in the FreePBX mirror server, and it can be installed in FreePBX 15 Plus directly from module admin. Let's talk about what Dynamic Routes can do. You can play a recording to the caller and get DTMF input back from the caller. You can store that DTMF input into a Dyn route or Asterisk channel variable, and you can reference that later in the same call, either in this dynamic route, in another dynamic route that the call changed to, or in some other method at any point while the channel is up. You can do basic validation of the input by means of a regex, and you can reprompt the caller to re-enter their DTMF if it fails the validation step. You can do that a certain number of times, which you can specify, and repeated validation failures, you can send the caller to an alternate destination. You can perform a lookup in the dynamic route. This is an optional step, but it's quite useful to be able to make an API call, say. You can pass the DTMF input from the previous step or from a previous dynamic route that the call is passed through. You could pass call parameters that are available via Asterisk variables, such as a caller ID or dialed DID. And you can store the returned result of the lookup in a Dyn route variable or an Asterisk variable. You can branch the call flow based on the result of the lookup. Again, another optional step. If you want to have all calls just go to the same destination regardless of the DTMF input or the lookup, you can by means of using the default destination. But the primary purpose of dynamic routes is to be able to branch call flow, and you can do that using whatever is returned from the previous lookup step. And that could be as simple as referencing a single asterisk channel variable, such as dial DID, or it can be quite complex by means of an API call where you pass multiple variables and get a result back. Okay, let's quickly walk through installing the dynamic routes module and going through the DynRoute options for setting up a new dynamic route. What we're looking at here is a fairly recent FreePBX 15 install. It's a stock FreePBX distro installation. So when I browse to module admin, I will see that by default only the standard repo is enabled. And I will also note that the dynamic routes module is not installed. I toggle on the unsupported repo, which is where the DynRoutes module lives, and click check online. Can scroll down in the section for applications. We'll see the option. I can expand here for dynamic routes. There's a button here to download and install, so I can toggle that, submit that page, confirm I want the module installed, and after a few seconds I'm given the option to click return, take us back to the page. In the upper right is the apply config button, as we would expect to see for any new module install, and under the applications menu we also now have the dynamic routes option to choose from. If I wanted to use the command line, fw console ma download install DynRoute, enter. You can also install the module that way. Either will work. Do not need to use both methods. Browsing to dynamic routes. We'll see on a brand new install, there's nothing present, but we do have a button to add a new dynamic route. What we see is a pretty conventional page for FreePBX. At the top, it prompts for a name. It's arbitrary. Let's do Astricon 2021. And there's a field for a description if you wish to use one. For the section that follows, labeled Dynamic Route DTMF Options, is entirely for configuring DTMF input from the caller. It is conventional when setting up a dynamic route to collect input from the caller, and if you want to do that, it's optional, but if you want to do it, you can do that by toggling DTMF input to yes and selecting an announcement. The announcement will tell them what to input. Here's one I prepared earlier using the system recordings module. You can create an announcement that says, please enter your account number. You also have an option for how many digits you want. In my case, all account numbers are 6 digits. The timeout will give people 8 seconds. So 8 seconds of inactivity is considered a timeout. And at this point, the system will either proceed on or attempt to validate the input from the caller. So there's this very useful field here called validation. You can populate that with a regex, POSIX compatible regular expression, to which Asterisk will compare the DTMF input against the regex. And if it fails that validation check, then there are another series of fields here that one can use to configure to reprompt the caller to re-enter their data to check it again. And if they fail the validation a certain number of times, which is user configurable, then you can choose to send them to another destination altogether instead of proceeding with the dynamic route. In the section that follows, we have dynamic route saved variables, where we can set variable names to refer to the quantities that we're getting at some point later in the call flow. So if I want to save the DTMF input from the caller in a variable, I can DTMF _in, and I can also save the lookup result that is returned by specifying the name of that variable here. Let's call it lookup _result. If you check the tooltips for the route saved variables, you will see that we can reference these variables in two different ways. If we wish to reference, suppose we want to reference the DTMF input from the caller at some point later in the call flow, I can choose to do that by enclosing the variable names in square brackets and using that anywhere in the same call flow in dynamic routes. So if I later type square bracket DTMF underscore in, close bracket, dyne routes will automatically substitute the value of the variable in place of that expression. I can also reference it as an asterisk variable using the conventional $, curly bracket, dyne route underscore DTMF underscore in, close curly bracket. And so then, I made a mistake, it's dyne route ending with an E. So at any point later in the call flow, I can reference that DTMF input from the caller using this asterisk expression here. The part that follows then is the dynamic route lookup source. There are a number of options here. I'll go through each of those in a little more detail in a bit, but let us select asterisk variable to be to start with. So if I want to, the next option here is enable substitutions, and that references the dynamic route saved variables. If I wish to reference those variables using square brackets, I do so by enabling substitutions. If I want to type in expressions that have square brackets that do not reference those variables, I would disable those substitutions. That's an important distinction to make. I'll say that part again. If you want to reference the dynamic route saved variables using square brackets, then you set enable substitutions to yes. If you want to use square brackets in the expression here that follows, but not reference these saved variables, then you would set that to no. And then for the asterisk variable, for this simple example, I'll use square bracket DTMFN, close square bracket. In this case, I will set source type as asterisk variable. Substitutions are enabled, and so when it gets to this point, the dyne route is essentially looking at whatever value has been entered as DTMF input by the caller. And so that's how we are going to branch the call flow in this example. The caller enters as many as 6 digits. It's passed the validation steps that I've put in. It's gotten to this point, and we are going to branch call flow based on the 6 digits entered. As part of this configuration, the default destination, that would be the case where all calls are sent that don't match a specific entry in the list that follows. And for this use case, it really doesn't matter. Let's say they all get sent to a specific ring group. I'll choose that at random. In cases where someone were to enter the string 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I'm going to specifically send those to, let's say, an extension. We can check 6007. If they enter 654-321, I can choose a different extension, 6009. Say that this is somewhat nonsensical arrangement, but essentially what we've done here is set up an IVR. The user arrives at, that is to say the caller arrives at the dynamic route. They're prompted to enter their account number. They do, and when it gets down below, if they were to enter the digits 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, they'll go to this destination. If they enter the digits 654-321, they'll go to this other destination. And if they enter any other input, then they are going to go to this default destination I've specified as a ring group. And that's it. We submit that and we are done. Once we've created a dynamic route, we are able to reference this as a free PBX destination as anywhere that will accept a destination, such as an inbound route. I'll choose one at random, and under this option here, we can now choose dynamic route, Astricon 2021, hit submit, and we are done with that example. All right, let's set up a dynamic route using a MySQL query. So what we want to do is browse to applications, dynamic routes. We're going to add a dynamic route, and we are going to call this Astricon MySQL. And in this case, we are not querying the caller for DTMF input. It's of no value in this case, so we don't need to save that value. I'll just quickly populate that with result. I'm unimaginative, and I select MySQL as the source type. So what I want to do is I want to direct inbound calls from specific caller IDs to the extension that they were speaking with most recently. So I called someone yesterday, I spoke with that person, and I don't know who they are, what their extension number is, but I call back again today, and instead of going to the generic reception, I am going to be routed to whomever I spoke with yesterday on the phone before the call goes to reception. So that sounds like a fun exercise. I am going to query the localhost CDR database. So the host name is localhost. Database is Asterisk CDR DB, which is where all the CDR records are stored. Username is root. There is no password for CDR access on the root user from localhost. And we're going to use this query that I've created once already, but first let's give it a test. Let's drop down to the PBX CLI. I type FW console M to get to MySQL. I'm going to use asterisk CDRDB to get to the correct database. And if I show tables, I will see that we have, in fact, the CDR and CEL tables. I'm going to paste in my query that I've developed previously. And what this does is it selects the DST, that's destination, from the CDR table, where the source column is like the caller ID number that I'm calling from, where dcontext is like xlocal. I'm going to order the results by call date descending, that is, give me the most recent first, and I'm going to limit the records return to 1. And if I hit enter, that returns one column with one value. So the most recent call from this caller ID was speaking with destination 6002, which is a local extension here on the PBX. For anyone who's thinking, oh, that query is genius, I could really use that, unfortunately, it really does need work. It is a sort of a proof of concept and nothing more at this stage. So if you want to use something similar to this, this is only really a good starting point. It's not definitive, as in this will not necessarily return the most recent extension number in all cases. It is and almost surely will be affected by whether the inbound calls go through ring groups or queues or go direct to an extension, that sort of thing. But for today's purposes, it is fine. So we've proved our query looks good, so let's jump back to the CDR, to the GUI, and I've lost my query. Let's copy that to the clipboard again, and I paste that in here for my SQL query. Now, in this query that we've used for testing, I've hard-coded the CDR, which is not what I want. I'm going to substitute the caller ID of the inbound caller. And since I have enabled substitutions set to yes, and I check the tooltip here for the MySQL query, we'll discover that number, all caps, between square brackets, is automatically the variable or the placeholder for substituting the number. And this is all good. I'm going to delete that trailing semicolon because I do not believe it's required. And what I'm going to do is, for testing purposes, I'm going to set the terminate call to, let's say, control, say, play ringtones forever in cases where it is the default destination. And if the lookup results in a value of 6002, I'm going to send that back to extension 6002. All right, so let us browse to inbound routes. I'm going to choose one of these. Did I have one set up already? I have not, so I'm just going to copy. Let's edit this inbound route, send it to Dyn routes, MySQL, submit, and apply config. I'm going to pull up my Zulu extension. I'm going to call that number as soon as the apply config is finished. And what will happen is inbound calls will be routed to the Dyn route. The live lookup will be done, and it will attempt to determine the most recent extension I was speaking with. Oh, let's watch the asterisk minus RVVV, so that'll give us the asterisk console as well. And let us call that number now. So that inbound call, click twice, that inbound call is in progress. And we can see here that there is something going on behind us. And it just so happens that the SIP client I have here that is registered to 6002 starts ringing. So I can answer that and then hang up. And we'll just quickly scroll back up here to the dynamic route part of the output, which is all right here. Essentially, we can see where the MySQL commands were run, and we can see the result is set Dyn route result is equal to 6002, and it was at this point that it routed the call to extension 6002. And so I would say that is a success. I want to show you how to create a dynamic route using the asterisk variable. So let's browse to dynamic routes. Let's create a new one, and we'll call this variable asterisk com. In this case, we are going to accept DTMF from the caller. So I'm going to enable that, repurpose this announcement, even though it's not really appropriate for what I'm doing. I'm going to accept a maximum digit of 1 from the caller. A 5-second timeout is fine. I go forgo the validation. Don't need to save the variable name because I'm not going to reuse it later on in the call flow. I'm going to select a source type of asterisk variable, and I am going to enable substitutions is not really important at this point. We'll just leave it the way it is. So ordinarily one would fork a conventional use of dynamic routes is to branch the call flow in order to, based on the lookup result. That's not what we're doing here at all with this example. What I want to do is basically collect a value from the caller, store that value, and then end the call. And I want to store that value permanently in the asterisk database or asterisk DB. And I'm going to do that using this expression I have over here. I'm going to paste that in here. And what I have done is create an AskDB family key pair of dyne CFC, that is dynamic call flow control, after hours. And I am, if we don't have any tooltip for this one. In this case, I am going to store the input variable name, input data in variable name dyne CFC, and I am going to pass that value into this expression here. And so what we're doing is we're setting a database value of dyne CFC after hours to the input, and then I'm going to terminate the call. And so I can submit that, and I need a way of dialing it. So my local extensions are going to dial 90210, and they are going to be taken to this new variable astricon. I'll submit, and I will apply config. It will take me to the asterisk BBBBB, and as soon as that apply config is finished loading, I'm going to load up my local SIP client, and I'm going to dial 90210, listen to the recording, and input a digit.
Please enter your account number.
I'm going to enter digit 6, and we can actually see that here, that we entered digit 6, and if I do database show dyne CFC for call flow control, you'll see that that value that I just entered via my SIP client is stored in the database as 6. I can call the same thing again, listen to the recording.
Please enter your account number.
This time I'm going to enter a 4. And now when I check the database, you'll see that there's a value of 4. So this dyne route I've just created is used to set a value of a single digit. I can then create a second dynamic route. Oh, I'm in the wrong place here. Let's browse dynamic routes. So if I can say, let's say we're going to call this after hours CFC, call flow control. And there is a call flow control in FreePBX already, and it gives you the ability to toggle it on or off, and it basically works very well if you have a 2 and only 2 destinations. I enable it, it goes in one direction. I disable it, it goes in another. But quite often you would have a case of, say, a group of people who are on call, and as in the case here, you want to be able to choose one of a group of destinations. And so that's what the first dynamic route does. It saves a digit between 0 and 9. And in this second one, we will check the value of that key in the AskDB, and we'll branch the call based on that. So we don't need any caller input for this one. We don't need to save any values. We choose a source type of asterisk variable, and let's get the expression here. It's pretty simple. The asterisk variable is just checking the AskDB for whatever the value for dyne CFC after hours is set to. I'll set a default destination. I don't know what, we have a default destination of, say, a ring group. These are kind of arbitrary, and I am going to have, say I have 4 different people on call at 4 different extensions, so they could be 1, 2, 3, 4. I have too many fields here, and I can choose a different extension for each. One will be 6002, one will be 6006, and extension 6007, and extension 6008. This is pretty simple. This way, whatever value is returned from that AskDB lookup, which right now, if we refresh our memory, is currently set to 4. So when it performs this lookup, it will discover that that's set to 4, and it is going to route calls to this extension 6008. And then all that really remains at this point is to set this as a destination. So supposing we wanted to set, let's use this one here. We can set this to dynamic route. And we're going to call this after hours CFC. We're going to submit that. And I need to apply config. And while that is happening, let's dial this in. And I am going to call the menu.
Please enter your account number.
I'm going to enter the digit 1. That hangs up. And we can refresh our memory. Database showed dying CFC is 1. And now inbound calls to that DID should ring through to 6006 because that's the value I have set in the database to correspond. And here it is. Echo, 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 hanging up. And that is how one goes about creating a call flow control with multiple separate destinations. One of the more common requests in the FreePBX community forum or in FreePBX support is to set up a caller survey or customer satisfaction input, that sort of thing, which you can do with dynamic routes. So let's walk through that now. I'm going to browse to Dyn Routes, and I'm going to add a new dynamic route, and I am going to call that Survey Q1. I am going to say yes, enable DTMF input. I'm going to choose an announcement I've previously uploaded via the system recordings. I'm going to accept a maximum digit of 1, and we'll just accept defaults for timeout and validation. But if I was putting this into production, I would put some effort into those. I'm going to save the input into a variable I will call Q1. And I am not going to do a Dyn route lookup source. Since the destination for the next step in the process doesn't exist yet, I can't select it here for default destination, so I'm going to submit. And I'm going to create a second dynamic route, which I will call Survey Q2. I'm going to enable DTMF input. I'm going to use the question 2 announcement, which again I have already uploaded. I'm accepting a maximum digit of 1, and I am going to save this into a variable I am calling Q2. Again, we are not doing a lookup at this point, and the destination for the next step in the process doesn't exist yet, so I'm going to submit that as is. Creating a third dynamic route. Let's call this post survey, and I am not going to need DTMF input, so I'm not enabling that. There's no need to save the input since it doesn't exist for the step, and I'm not interested in saving the lookup result. But we are going to perform a lookup, and we're going to pretend that we have an API somewhere that we can call via URL, and I can define that here. In order to test this, I am going to create a temporary URL for testing purposes at a website called postb.in, where I say create bin. This gives me a temporary URL to which I can send data and see what gets sent. I'm going to paste that URL in here. I'll remove the args that are the default and add my own. So question 1 equals, we reference dine route variables that have been set up before, is the name of the variable in square brackets, ampersand question 2 equals Q2, again, ampersand, and let's set caller ID equals $, curly bracket, caller ID, all. So we'll also send the caller ID of the caller as a get arg as well to this URL. This will be a stand-in in place of whatever system we're sending our data to for collecting survey results. All calls at this point, I have no reason to extend the call beyond this, so I can terminate the call with a hang up, but obviously I can choose whatever destination I want at this point. So I'm going to submit that page. Now we'll go back to our previous dine routes that we created and set the destination. So the question 1 dine route leads into dynamic route for question 2. Submit. The question 2 dine route leads into the dine route for post survey. Submit. Now I want some means of testing it, so let's create a miscellaneous application. Add misc application, so this will just be a dialable feature code from a local extension that I can use for testing. Say dine route test feature code, again a random series of digits. Oop. Dynamic routes, and we'll call this survey Q1. Submit. Now I can apply config, and as soon as that apply config is done, we can pull up my SIP client, dial 90210, and see what happens. Okay, that apply config is done. 90210, we can call. Question 1, let's input a digit 5. Question 2, and let's input a digit 7. That call went to hang up, and refresh this page, and here's the record I just posted. So from caller ID 6002, you can see that I responded to question 1 with a digit 5, question 2 with a digit 7. So this is a perfect stand-in for our API call from the PBX. And using this technique, we can daisy chain as many dine routes together that we need to first collect the data and then post it. Before I wrap up this presentation, I wanted to introduce the idea of using an Asterisk AGI file as a means of using a lookup source in a dynamic route. In the examples you've seen already, we are able to get the desired lookup result with a single SQL query or an API call that returns plain text, APIs that are receiving simple get variables. But in real life, things are more complex. You may have an API that you need to post information to, or you may be relying on a library or framework or something in order to exchange the information you want. You may have a series of SQL queries, or you need to evaluate multiple sources of information. In any case, you have a lookup that is much more complicated than what we can accomplish with 2 or 3 fields in the GUI. And so the way we handle that situation, one way we can handle that situation, is to use an Asterisk AGI file. That's an Asterisk gateway interface. Just hands-off call control from dial plan to a script written in a full programming language. And when the script runs, it returns control back to the dial plan. So let's call this Astricon AGI. And let's ignore the DTMF input and variable storage. We don't need any of that. We are going to select lookup type, a source type of AGI, and we'll note here that we're looking for an AGI lookup. That is the path and file name to the script on the system that we're using, as well as whatever variable is being used to assign the result in the AGI file. So I have an AGI file on the system, and it's saved in the conventional location of var lib asterisk AGI bin. It is called dinroutes-test.agi. You'll see it is written in PHP, about a dozen lines. About half of them are comments. All it does is load the FreePBX Bootstrap environment, which we're not even using in this example, so that's unnecessary. It does load the AGI environment so that we have a library we can use for class and methods for interacting with Asterisk. So it sets up that class. It sends a log line saying that we're starting. That appears in the Asterisk full log. We have a PHP to generate a random number between 1 and 4. We then log that randomly generated number to the Asterisk full log, and this is the critical step in that we assign that random number to a Asterisk channel variable named AGI-random. And once that's accomplished, the script ends, hands off call control back to the dial plan. I'm going to exit out of here. We'll go back to the AGI and we'll paste in the value of this AGI-random. We'll get the other details here. So I am in varlib asterisk AGI bin. That's the path. And the name of the script is dinroutes-test.agi. And we are done. Oh, one thing I forgot to mention, it's rather important, in that ll dinroutes test AGI, you will see that this file is owned by Asterisk user, and it has the executable bit enabled. Both of those are requirements in order to use an AGI file from Asterisk dial plan. So what have we accomplished here? When a call flow goes to this dyn route, it calls an AGI file, and this is the path and file name to that file. The file runs, and we can see from the previous step that it generates a number between 1 and 4, and it assigns it to an Asterisk channel variable. And this is the name of the Asterisk channel variable. So all this dyn route has to do is run the script, and then in order to do the call branching, I need to create 4 options here for 4 different extensions, or 4 different destinations really. 2, 3, 4. Those are the 4 possible text values returned from the AGI. And I can choose whatever I want. So let's suppose that it randomly distributes inbound calls through a series of extensions. That's certainly a possibility. I can just choose whatever extensions I want. 6006. Let's do extension again, 6007. And extension 6008. This seems like a perfectly adequate way of distributing inbound sales calls randomly between different sales agents, I suppose. So that's something we could do. Just on the off chance that there's a failure or something odd or unexpected happens, I would set a default destination, and I don't know what's a good example. We can set it to a ring group or something like that. Again, it's entirely up to your use case, and these are entirely settable from the admin. I don't think I'm going to test this. It won't be easy to predict what's supposed to happen with a randomly generated file, but I think the intent here is clear, that if one needs to hand off dial plan to an AGI script that is easily accomplished with a dyne route. And the way that the result is communicated back to dynamic routes in order to branch the call is that you set a value to a channel variable and you specify what that variable is in the GUI. I'll hit that submit and I'll say we are done. Okay, that seems like a good place to cut things off for today. So throughout this presentation, we have seen a quick history and overview of the module from its early days in 2009 through to the present. We saw how to install the module in FreePBX 15, and we got an overview of the features and GUI options available when creating a dynamic route. I should probably have pointed out prior to now that everything in this video applies equally to PBExact 15. So if you wish to install it on PBExact, you're free to do so and use all of the techniques discussed here. We walked through several worked examples to demonstrate the more popular features of the module, whether DTMF input from callers, making API calls or SQL queries, using the asterisk variable to read from and write to asterisk expressions. All kinds of possibilities there, and a few more features we didn't even cover through today. I love the dynamic routes module. It really opens up possibilities for sophisticated call controls in FreePBX. Once you realize that you can control a call handling based on the status of whatever you can query, whether it's home automation, CRMs, whether caller IDs or caller names exist in whitelists or blacklists, the possibilities really are quite diverse. The module is versatile enough so that it supports use cases that at first glance don't appear to be related at all. So if we take the classical use case where we solicit input from a caller via DTMF and branch the call flow based on that alone, to the use case where we are not branching the call and not prompting the caller for information, but just executing an API call or query that sends information to a remote host. And knowing that we can chain dynamic routes together quite easily to do both and other features as well. In the open source lounges that we hold once a month, usually on Thursday evenings in North American time, we had a demonstration by one of my colleagues here at Sangoma, Sergio Lobera, who showed how he replaced a conventional IVR on FreePBX with a dynamic route. And prior to branching the call based on the DTMF input from the caller, he did an API call to send the data to Grafana installation, which allowed daily, weekly, monthly reports showing IVR usage, which options are used when and how often. Could be very useful for some use cases. So, on behalf of myself, for everyone in the community, for anyone who's used this module with success in the past, anyone who's seeing this perhaps for the first time and thinking it could be useful, I offer sincere thanks to John Fawcett for creating the module, for continuing to maintain it, and for adding features as they are requested. And I offer John as an example for anyone who sees anything in FreePBX that they perceive as a feature that's lacking or something that could use improvement. Follow John's example and contribute where you can. Does not have to be an entirely new module, although if you're keen to code such a thing, we would heartily welcome it. But tinkering at the edges is fine. Adding features or improvements to existing open source modules certainly are welcome. There's always a requirement for documentation. So if you want to help out with the wiki or creating standalone documents for setting up specific features or integrations, there are opportunities available for all of that. And as always, in the FreePBX and Asterisk community forums, anyone who is willing or ready to offer support to the community is certainly encouraged to do so by joining the conversations always ongoing at the forums for Free PBX and Asterisk. I realize that we kind of just scratched the surface with what's possible in the dynamic routes module. So anyone who runs into roadblocks or needs a little push in order to figure out how to best do what they want to do is welcome to approach me or the entire community at the Free PBX forum with your questions. Thank you very much for listening. I hope everyone has a great Astricon, and we'll once again hope for an in-person Astricon next year. Thank you very much. Good day all. I'll take some questions now.